Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. In today's episode, I sit down with keyboard icon Rick Wakeman. He's a musician whose contributions to rock and progressive music have left an indelible mark. Best known for his work with Yes, Rick's incredible career also includes collaborations with artists like David Bowie, Elton John, and Cat Stevens. From his powerful performances on Yes classics to his unforgettable contributions on Bowie's Space Oddity and Stevens' Morning is Broken, Rick's versatility and passion have defined him as a true legend. Here's my interview. Rick, welcome. It's a pleasure to meet you in person.
I've reciprocated, thank you.
I wanted to start with talking about the session work that you did back before, in the 60s, and just your thoughts on that.
It was an era that will never be repeated. It could never come back. It was the most wonderful apprenticeship course I could have asked for. I sort of got into sessions, I won't say by accident, because I firmly believe in the old statement, success is where opportunity meets preparation.
Yeah.
I worked hard at my music with all my grades, and I was about to go to college. I was still at school, but about to go to Royal College of Music. I was playing in different bands because my father encouraged me to play in every kind of band possible. He used to say, I know you'll have music that you'll like the most, but there'll be music that perhaps you don't like, but play it and see if you can find out why people do like it. I mean, he encouraged me to...
And he was a pianist.
He was a great piano player.
Yeah.
He was a lovely piano, in the stride style, like the old Fat Swallow kind of thing, with the old... that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He was really good. And he knew that I didn't like country and western. The old style country and western. Country rock's different, but country western, the Jim Reeves kind of stuff where the dog dies, the guys, the truck of the house burns down. I found it depressing. My mum used to love that kind of country and western.
Okay.
And I used to say to her, Mum, when you buy yourself a record player where you can play the record backwards so the dog comes back to life, you get the house back and the truck works, I said, then you can play. There was a pub close to where we lived in a little town called Hayes in West London. And on a Sunday, they had a country and western band that played in there. And Dad said, go down and sit in with them. Go down. He said, I'm not suggesting that you're going to end up liking it all, but you might find out what other people do and how to play it. And I'm really glad I did, because one of the first sessions I did years later was a country and western thing. Okay. So I knew the style, I knew what to do. But the big, we call it break or whatever, I was doing BBC sessions, which paid nothing, because at one stage after pirate radio finished in England, the BBC had Radio 1, but what the Musicians' Union demanded of them that they had to employ musicians as well as playing records. So there was a thing called needle time and non-needle time.
Okay. And
the non-needle time, basically bands went into, or musicians went into a place called Maida Vale. It's a little old studio that was used during the war.
Like a recording studio.
Yeah. But old-fashioned, with a big old dial, all mono, one take. And you went in there and you did some tracks which were then played on the radio shows, which were non-needle time.
Okay.
And there were some great I did some of those sessions. I was 16, 17. There'll be Jimmy Page would be there. All people unknown at the time, Ian Page, Mooney, John Entwistle. I mean, if they could find some of those tapes, they'd be priceless. Wow. And we used to do things like Morning Dew and things like that. It was just the old rock stuff we used to play. I was also, when I wasn't at school, because I was doing my A-levels as the advanced things at school, so you had a few hours off. And I used to go to a music shop in South Ealing, in South London, called the Musical Bargain Centre, which sold second-hand gear. And I used to go in there and just hang out, as you do, in that shop. And there was a shop just around the corner from there, which was Marshall's, which was owned by Jim Marshall.
Okay.
Marshall, who became a very, very close friend in years to come. And so I used to hang around those two shops. I hadn't got any money, so I couldn't buy anything. But the thing was, I spoke to Jim many years later. I said, why did you let us kids go? He said, because if I let you in, he said, rather than throw you out, he said, I knew that one day you guys, if you wanted to get some stuff and you were in a band, you'd come here And he was dead right. He was spot on, Jim, a great, great friend. So I was in the Musical Bargain Centre one day, and a guy came in, and Dave Sims used to run it. And Dave said, hello, Chaz, how are you? And Chaz said, got a big problem. And that was Chaz Cronk, who ended up with the Straubs and all that. And he said, there's a session at Olympic Studios. He said, next week, he said, for a guy called Jimmy Thomas. And Jimmy Thomas was the male singer of the Ike and Tina Turner band. A great singer, a lovely guy. A lot of people think that Ike sang, but Ike didn't sing. He just played a guitar. Yeah. And Jimmy Thomas was there. So he's coming over with his band to record for Denny Cordell at Olympic Studios. And he said, Dave said, what's the problem? He said, well, some of the band have been held at Heathrow Airport for having some sort of powdery stuff that they shouldn't have, and they've all been arrested and they're being sent. And he said, so it's a nightmare. He said, so I just happened to be around Regal's on a phone up in London, and then he said, we need 3 brass players, and we need a Hammond organist, and we need somebody to do the arrangements for the brass and all that, and we've only got a week to do it. And Dave Sims said, Chaz, Rick will do it. And he went, hello. He said, you haven't met Rick, that's Chaz. And shook his, and he said, can you, that's brilliant. Hold on a minute, I've got a 1/4-inch tape in the car, I'll go and get it. So he went out and he came back in with this real 7-inch reel, and he said, right, he said, we need, it's three brass, we need a trombone, trumpet and tenor sax to do that arrangement, and you can do the organ, that's absolutely brilliant. It's Olympic Studios, it's Friday week. I went, yeah, okay, and off Chaz went, and I said, Dave, what have you just done? He said, you can do it, you're capable of doing it. I said, I'm 17, I'm still at school, and he said, I know you can do a great job. So I said, well, the next problem is I don't have a tape recorder.
So you can't even listen to this?
Yeah, how the hell can I listen to it? I don't have a tape recorder. I was living at home, Mum and Dad, so I went home, and my Dad was home from work, and he said, how's your day? And I said, I've got a problem, Dad, and I don't know what to do. He said, what's that? And I said, well, I've got this tape I've got to listen to, I don't have a tape recorder. And he said, what's it for? And I told him, and he said, how much is it? I said, it's going to cost me about 30 quid, £30, which is a lot of money. That was twice his wages for the week. And Dad said, right, let's get you sorted. He said, you can pay me back at a later. So I got a Grundig tape recorder, and I put the tape on, and I had little speakers and a lamp, and it just didn't sound right. And then it occurred to me that the Grundig tape recorder, its top speed was 7.5.
Oh, and this was 15.
This was 15. So head in hands, so Dad said, we'll go back to the shop. So I went back to the shop, upgraded to one that played at 15.
Wow.
Came back. I played it, I wrote all the parts. I didn't have much time to do it. I wrote the parts. This is absolutely true. Now, what you normally do, so I learned later, is in the days then, before Sibelius or whatever, you wrote out the main score, you wrote it in concert pitch, you threw it to a copyist who would then copy it with the necessary key changes. I didn't have time to do this. I had one great friend who was a trumpet, because I hadn't done any major sessions, who was a trumpet player called Kenny Baker, who was very famous trumpet player, and I'd met him playing with a dance band at a ballroom out in Berkshire, and I called him up and I said, he said, I'll sort your players out for you, Rick, don't worry. I said, thank you very much. Well, I got a friend of mine to help copy the parts out quick because we didn't have much time to do it, and it was the famous thing, ink almost dry when we arrive at the studio. So I get to the studio, to Olympic Studios. I'd never been in it. It's a wonderful studios. Rolling Stones owned it at one stage. It was absolutely brilliant. And so I went in there, met Denny Cordell, who was later the producer, found Joe Cocker and other people like that. Mm-hmm. Also in the control room were Tony Visconti and Gus Dudgeon, who were there. And then there was Jimmy was there, a lovely guy. And then there was the band. I was the only white guy there, which was fine. Didn't worry me one iota. It was great. But the guys, they were all sort of what I call Marquez players, the great stack stuff, which was a great love of mine. I mean, on my jukebox to this day, it's 30% Stax records and things. Love all of that. So I'm in there, but I don't play like that. So the deal was, the first session was to get the backtracks down. It was a track called The Running Kind, which never got released in the end, which is a great shame because it was a great track. It was The Running Kind and then another track as well. And then the second session, it was the brass section, which I was MDing. So I'm sitting at the Hammond organ there and the guys play this. Now, I played the only way I know how, which is sort of I suppose what was considered then a very sort of classical. So we did a couple of takes through and the none of the other music, they just played their bits and whatever. It was a fun track. And then Denny Cordell said, "Organist, what's your name?" And I said, "Rick." He said, "Can you come in the control room?" And I thought, oh, fuck. And I went in there and he said, "Right." He said, "Where did you learn to play like that?" And I said, "I know you probably want a Booker T type thing. I can do it, but it's not really what I do. I'm sorry. But I can do it if you want that kind of thing." He said, "No, no, no." And he said, "You've got a very unique way of playing." He said, and I said, "Well, do you want me to change it?" He said, "No, no, no." He said, "Word of advice." He said, "You're going to do a lot of sessions for a lot of people. You play like you. Don't play like, Booker T or anybody else. Play like you." He said, "And I bet you within a couple of years, people were going to other keyboard players go, play like this guy, Rick. What's your second name?" I said, "Wake." He said, "Play like Rick Wake." I went, "All right." He says, "You carry on doing what you're doing." He said, "You did the brass arrangements as well, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm looking forward to that." He said, "Why haven't I seen you around the studios very much?" And I thought, I can't tell him that I haven't. And I said, "Well, I've been away," which was true. I'd just been on holiday with me mum and dad. And I said, I've been abroad on holiday. And I didn't say on holiday. I said, "I've been abroad." He went, "Oh, right, okay. Well, tomorrow," he said, I'd like to see. Can you come up to the offices, which is 68 Oxford Street, Dumbarton House?" He said, "and come up and have a chat with me and Gus and Tony about some future stuff." He said, "Can you be up there at 9 o'clock in the morning?" And without thinking, I just went, "That'd be a bit tricky. I've got a geography exam." And they all looked up. I could see it to this day, them looking up, and they went, "Are you at school?" I thought, I've just blown it. Well, I went, "Yeah, I'm doing," and then I'm off to the Royal College of Music. And I can remember to this day, Denny leaning back, he went, "Okay." He said, "You got a geography exam?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Is that going to be your career?" I went, "No, I want to be a musician." He said, "Well, at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning in my office, I'll know how much you want to be a musician."
Wow.
I was outside his office at 7:30 in the morning and waited and went in, and that was it. But the brass section thing was hilarious because Kenny Baker arrived with the other two guys. I handed the music over. We started playing, and it was awful. And Danny goes, "What the hell is this?" So I went in and I was conducting him, and Kenny Baker said, he moved away from the mics, came over to me, he said, "Who copied these for you?" I said, "Well, just a mate at college, at the school college." He went, "None of it's been transposed."
Oh, man.
And I went, "Oh," shit. He said, "Don't worry." So he went back to the guy, he said, "Transpose." Just whispered like that. And then they played it. They played and transposed it as they went along.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. And it was a great soundtrack. And Danny went, well, that was fantastic. What was it the first time?" I said, "Oh, my fault. I handed them out old parts and things to some bullshit." And that was it.
I'd like to take a second to talk to you about this channel. Of the people that regularly watch my channel, 58% are actually not subscribed. So I encourage you to hit the subscribe button now. This will help me to get even more of my dream guests and continue to grow my channel. Thank you.
And then I met properly Tony Visconti and Gus Dudgeon, which was how I ended up meeting David Bowie, how I did the stuff for T-Rex and all of those. So that was the start of me in proper studios. But the session thing, it was a unique time for sessions because there were two sorts of sessions. There was the band sessions where somebody said, "Oh, come along and play," and you just learnt the track, which is what he did with like T-Rex, Harry Nilsson, Colin Scott, Al Stewart, all those kind of things. And then there was the reading sessions, which were run by fixers. There was like 3 major fixers in London.
What does that mean? What's a fixer? What is that?
You want to make a record, or the record company have got an artist, they want him to make a record. They'd phone the fixer, they say, "Okay, fixer, you need to get, we want you to get this is the producer, he wants an orchestra of this size or a band of this size. You book all the musicians and the time in the studio. You just book everything. And then the arranger who will do the music, so that you would, if you could read music, wanted to get on a fixers list because you work non-stop. But it meant you turn up in the studio, the music was thrusting for you, you at best had 2 goes at it. You had to get it right because it was money.
Yeah.
And you did that, and everybody wanted to go on a fixers list. And I got on a fixers list a bit by accident. I was considerably younger than all the guys doing the sessions, so it was really hard. And you couldn't have phoned up and say, "Please, can you put me in?" It didn't work like that. And I did a session for a semi-folk electric band called Magna Carta. And they did some things with the orchestra. They booked me because I knew them through Straws and various things to do the piano bits. And the orchestra was booked by a fixer called David Katz, who was not happy with Magna Carta that they booked me separately because they like to book everything. So I arrive at the studio and I'm given a bit of the cold shoulder by all of the guys, but it was okay because luckily one of the pieces featured piano quite a lot. So I played and hopefully did a good job. And after the session was over, David Katz said, "Can I have a word with you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Your reading's pretty good." I said, "Well, I've been doing, and I was at Royal College of Music and did a lot of reading." And I said, "I like sight reading, it's good." He said, "I might have some sessions for you." I said, "That would be absolutely wonderful." He said, I'll put you on my list. Do you have your telephone number?" The answer was no, because I lived at home with my mum and dad. So I gave my mum and dad's number, and I said, "This is my number, Byron 6428." He went, "Oh, great, lovely. I'll call you." So I said, "Thank you." And I came back from college just a few days later, and my mum said to me, she said, "I've had this Mr. Katz on the phone." I said, "Oh yeah, David Katz." She said, "I've got a list here. He's given you 18 sessions."
Oh my gosh.
I said, "What?" He said, "You've got 18 sessions to do." And I said, she said, "I've made a note of the studios." Well, I didn't know anything. The only studio I knew was Olympics. That's the only one. Right. She said, "First one's in 2 days' time or whatever." And she said, "That's at Advision Studio." She said, "I've looked up the address. It's in Bond Street." I said, "Fine." She said, "You've got to be there. It's 10 till 1. And I said, "Right." She said, "It's piano." I said, "Right, okay." So I thought, well, that's good. I'll skip college lectures that day. That would be really good. So I got up to like really early. I was up at 8 o'clock, walked down Bond Street. There at the address which my mum had looked up and given me was a demolition site. There was nothing there. So my initial thought is, this is a wind-up. But then I thought, no, who would wind me up with this? So I went to a phone box, phone directory, looked it up, and sure enough, it was Bond Street and the various things. So I'm starting to panic. So I called my mum. "Mum, I'm here. It's not here." And by this time now, it's 9:30, 9:45. Session starts at 10. Mm-hmm. I thought, this is not the start I'm hoping for. So my mum did some phoning around and called people, and finally got hold of David Katz's wife at home. Mm-hmm. With a number. She said, "Well, it's moved. It's moved. It has a new studio in Gosfield Street." She said, "That's right." So Mum called. She said, It's in Gosfield Street. It's moved." I got there at 11:15.
Oh, geez.
I walked in, and I was met with a lot of, this is because David said, "I've got this new young whiz kid piano player. He can't even turn up on time. That's how much he cares." And I went in and I said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know what." And David said, "Look, we're running late. You just get in." The music was on the stand. I mean, eyes burning in clear. But it was 3 pieces to play. And featured piano quite heavily, but suited my style of idea. So I did the 3. Everything was done in sort of 1 or 2 takes. The session finished 15 minutes early. So everyone went out, and I thought, that's me finished. And David Katz said, "Come into control, I want to talk to you." So I taught him. He said, one of the things that's most important is timing. I said, I was here at 8 o'clock. I said, I went to Bond Street. I told him the whole story. And I said, I didn't. He said, how many sessions have you done? I said, this is my first. And I said, and probably my last. And he said, well, you salvaged yourself by playing. He said, you really have. He said, but here's what we're going to do. He said, I'm going to sit down with you now. He said, and I'm going to tell you all the major studios in London, where they are, because a lot of them aren't in the phone book, and how to get there, and all of the things. He said, okay. He said, so you'll never be late again. I said, no. And I mean, I was in tears. I literally was in tears. And so that's how my session thing started. And of course, the interesting thing was that word spread about me turning up 45 minutes late because I didn't know where the studio was and all the things, which actually helped a lot, because other sessions would go, well, how did he play? He was very good, actually. And so I got a lot of extra work. But it took a few months before I was accepted by because the sessions, they were a closed shop of people.
And they're older than you, too, right?
All 10, 15 years, 20 years older than me in some cases. And it was a session that I did for a guy called Howard Blake, who wrote The Snowman and other things. That's what changed a lot of things for me, because the session with Howard Blake, I went along, and normally after you'd done your session, you went off for lunch and had a drink or whatever. And all of the session music, they'd all stick together. And I went to a pub called the Redown in Queensway to have a drink and a sandwich before going off to the next session. And all the brass players were up one end who had always said hello when I went into the studio, but that was it. And then one of them, I can't tell you his name because I can't remember, said, Rick, come and join us. So I then John said, what are you drinking? I said, well, I'll have a pint of lager, please. Thanks. Said, yeah, we're just getting some sandwiches in. What'd you find? And suddenly I thought, I've done my little apprenticeship course with them. I'm accepted now. And that was it. And they did say, some of the guys said later, well, we like to make sure that you can do the job and you're one of us. So I became one of them then. But the Howard Blake, that's another lovely little story. I was doing a session at, I think it was the CBS studios in Queensway, and I was there in the morning doing a session, and it came to lunchtime. There was a wonderful drummer called Barry Morgan, and Barry said to me, where are you this afternoon, Rick? And I said, I'm here. He said, Howard Blake? I said, yeah, I'm doing a session, Howard Blake. He said, what are you doing now? I said, well, I'm going to go and have a sandwich. And he said, no, you're not. And I said, what do you mean? He said, Howard Blake hates keyboard players. And I said, come on, tell me. He said, Howard Blake is a fine keyboard player himself, and he writes parts as he would play, almost impossible for other musicians to play, because he likes to, he said, really, to be quite nasty, so that when they can't play, he said, I'll come down and show you. He does all of that. I said, oh, shit. What can I do? He said, look, there was a guy called George Bamford who used to do all the copying. He said, all the parts will arrive about half an hour. He said, I suggest you wait, take the keyboard folder out. It was harpsichord and piano. He said, have a quick look, and if there's anything there, which there will be, that's nigh on impossible, spend half an hour at the piano just learning it as best as you can, slip it back in the folder and do it like that. I said, OK. Now, all the other musicians, there's about 30-piece orchestra, they all knew. So it came to the session, I'm in there, I'm sitting at the piano, and Howard Blake came in, and he handed out all the folders of all the music, and he said, so you're the new whiz-kid young piano player that can read anything, are you? I said, well, I don't know about that, Mr. Blake, but I enjoy playing and doing it. He said, have fun with that. So I opened it up, and I could see him watching me out the corner of my eye. And I'd seen it all. And there was one particular piece, because it was for a film, it had strange letter, I think it was 1M5, which was reel 1, fifth piece of the movie. So it was ridiculous. It was one of those kind of things, like spiders everywhere. And I practiced it, so I went, yeah, it's all right, close it. And turned around and talked to Les Hurdle, the bass player, was there, saying, yeah, where are you? Are you anywhere this evening, I think? And I could see daggers coming out of Howard Blake. And he went, right, so we're going to start with 1M5. He said, "But I think it starts on the harpsichord, which I think is you, Rick, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah, it is." He said, "Right, on your own. It's a bit quicker than you think." I said, "OK." He said, 2, 3, so I went... did all that, and all they're all sort of like smirking and look, because they know exactly what's gone on. And he went, "Right, we'll do it with everybody now." So we did it. We did all the session. When the session finished, everyone was leaving, and it was a done thing. The session was just, you don't go in the control room. That's not your domain. I was going, and he went, "Thank you, everybody." And then he said, "Not you." He said, "You in the control room. I want to talk to you." Oh shit! So I go in the control room, and we sat down. He said, "I don't know if you know anything about my reputation." He said, "But I write parts that keyboard players can't play." That's right. He said, "That's the finest piece of sight reading I've ever seen in my life." He said, "Almost impossible." He said, "If I didn't know better, I'd say you knew it." And I said, "Well, I'll be very honest with you, Mr. Blake. I was warned about what you did, so I missed my lunch hour. And when the music arrived, I took the file out and I picked out certain bits and I practiced as best as I could, to be able to play it and do it." And he sort of grinned. He said, "Did you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, good for you." He said, "You can play a bit." I said, "Thank you, Mr. Blake." And he said, "You know what?" He said, "I'm going to insist on you for every one of my sessions in future." He did all and I say he wrote The Snowman and lots of things. He was great. And the next session I did for him, the file was put out, and I opened it up, and it was what I call a sketch part, not all the dots, and he just written on it, "You know what I like."
Wow.
I mean, there are some wonderful session stories of the people I work with, and it was just great fun. And I worked with great producers. When you work with the likes of Tony Visconti and Ken Scott and Robin Cable and Danny Cordell, all these people, you pick up good things. And David Bowie said to me, "Learn from these guys, because when you come to do your own record," he said, "you'll have such experience in the studio that people couldn't dream of." And it was of a tremendous help to me. There'll never be another era like it.
Now, you told me that people didn't go in the control rooms, and Tony and Gus, they would invite you in.
Yeah.
And what was that like? What kind of stuff would you talk about, or would they show you?
Basically, when you went in there, you kept your mouth shut, really, because they were discussing things. But the thing that was interesting was, I mean, one of the reasons that session musicians, the control rooms were relatively small, so you couldn't crowd 30 or 40 people in.
Right.
So unless it was, sometimes they might invite a trumpet player because there was something they wanted them to hear to when they go back in for another take and do. But they knew that I was interested in everything. Eventually I joined Straubs and things like that. I was in a band and whatever. So you go in there, and the great thing about these producers like Gus and Tony Visconti, they were all studio engineers. They knew the desk inside out and backwards, but they didn't touch it. They had an engineer there that they knew could translate what they wanted to go in. So that was interesting. Let the engineer do his job and let the musicians do their job.
Okay, so I want to ask you about how often you would play piano on sessions, organ on sessions, harpsichord, and any type of auxiliary keyboards.
Probably of the 2,000 odd sessions that I did, I would say 80% were piano.
Okay.
80% were piano, and then some were multiple because, synth sessions weren't around then. They didn't exist. Harpsichord, you do a lot, especially if you're doing films, you get harpsichord. And that was a unique thing as well, the harpsichord.
And had you played harpsichord before that?
And that is interesting because I like the harpsichord, but the harpsichord's an interesting instrument because the keys are smaller than a piano. They're fractionally smaller. You can always tell a piano player when he's playing a harpsichord because he'll split notes because the keys are smaller. So he'll be doing... He'll do that. Because the notes are that closer together. And it fascinated me, and I thought... and I did a few BBC sessions harpsichord and really didn't do as well as I wanted because of the keys being smaller.
Yeah.
But when I was at the Royal College of Music, they had practice rooms, which you could go down and practice. They all had pianos, but 3 of the rooms had harpsichords in. And one of them had a Thomas Goff harpsichord, and I loved the Thomas Goff harpsichords. So I used to I wasn't allowed to use it because I wasn't a harpsichord student, but I would hang around, and then if nobody had gone in on the hour to play, I knew there's nobody going in, so I'd go in for half an hour, and I'd play the Thomas Goff harpsichord, which I love. And one day I was playing the harpsichord, and the door opened, and this man came in, and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Oh, sorry." He said, "You're not a harpsichord student, are you?" I went, "No, sir." And I thought, this is another professor. I'm in trouble now. And he said, "So why are you in here?" I said, "Well, I'm not taking anybody else's time up. So, but I'm interested in the harpsichord. I'm fascinated with the harpsichord, and I want to get experience of playing it. So I hang around. If nobody comes in, has booked the room, I sneak in for half an hour, 45 minutes and play." And he went, "There's 3 harpsichords in the college. Why the Thomas Goff one?" I said, "Because I think it's the most beautiful sounding of the harpsichords, and I really like them a lot." He said, "Would you like to play the harpsichord a bit more?" And I said, "I'd love to." He said, "I have some in my house. Would you like to come round and play?" I said, "Yes, please, sir." He said, "Here's my card." He said, "Call up my butler." I went, "Right, okay." It's a very posh house in just off of Sloane Square. In Sloane Square, multi-million pound house. And he said, "And then we'll book a time. You can come round and play." And I said, "Thank you, sir." And off he went, and it was Thomas Goff. So I called up, spoke to his butler, and we arranged the time for me to go around in between lectures and various things. So this is absolute true story. So I arrived round at this house. Stunning, unbelievable house. Probably, I would think, no exaggeration to say, you wouldn't get it for less than 30 or 40 million pounds today. So the butler answers the door. I'm a little poor student. I've got, I walked there because I hadn't got the bus fare to get there. So the butler said, "Yes, Mr. Goff is expecting you." So I go in, and Thomas Goff came out. He said, "Right, come into this room." He said, "There's 3 harpsichords in there. There's one I think you'll really like." And I said, when he said, "Do you like budgerigars?" And I said, "Well, when I was younger, so I had a budgerigar." He said, "Oh, good." So I walked in there, and there's like budgerigars flying around. He said, "I love budgerigars." I went, "Oh, great." So he said, "You carry on playing." And he said, "I won't disturb you, just enjoy." So I sat down at the harpsichord, and I'm playing. I'm thoroughly enjoying myself. And it comes to about 11 o'clock, and the butler comes in. And he said, "Mr. Goff requires your presence in the parlour for morning tea." He said, "with his other guest." I went, "Oh, morning tea." So I go into this part, and I'm in a tiny little 2-up, 2-down house. This is ridiculous. His parlour's bigger than the house I brought up in. So I go in there, and he said, "How are you finding the house?" I said, "It's beautiful, Mr. Goff, thank you." He said, "Sit down," got some tea, and he had a maid and a thing there, and there was tea, and there was some cake, and considering I could hardly afford to eat as a student, I'm looking at the cake and going, and he said, "Help yourself to go." And there was a woman at the end of this huge, long table, reading a paper, which was the Sporting Life, which is the horse racing paper, and she's just behind there. So I'm sitting down, and this is the moment where I don't know how to hold a teacup. How do I do? So I've got to go. And he said, "I'm glad you enjoy the." He said, "Oh." And he said, "Elizabeth," he said, "did you hear any of the playing?" She put the paper down. It was the Queen Mother.
Oh, my gosh.
So I'm now just very grateful that I'd had a bowel movement before I arrived, because I don't know what to do. I'm sitting there, and she went, "Yes, very nice." And I went, "And you don't know what to say or what to do?" And she said, "That's very nice." And he said, "Help yourself to a piece of cake." Okay. He said, "Do you like horses?" And I said, "Well, yes, I like horses." He said, "Do you bet on the horses?" I said, "I'm a student, and I can barely afford a potato at lunchtime, let alone back on the horses." She said, "That's a shame." She said, "There's a very good horse running," and she didn't mention where it was. She said that you should bet on, but she said, "You've got a couple of shillings you could put on it?" And the truth about it was I hadn't, but I thought, I'm not going to say. I said, "Well, yes, probably." She said, "Well, here." She wrote it down, and she went, "Thank you." So I then go back in after the tea and coffee to do my harpsichord. I didn't back on the horse. I never know what happened to it. I hadn't got any money. But we now have to move on. There is a sequel to this story. We move on now. This was what, 1968 this would have been? 67, 68. And I'm now with Yes, and things are like going really well, very, really good. And I had a great friend who was a journalist called Michael Whale. And Michael Whale loved his horse racing and things. And he said, come down and watch some of the horses work out, which was down in a place called Banbury, to the John Webber stables. I went, yeah, okay. So I came there. He said, you don't have to be a betting man to enjoy watching the horses and things. I said, okay. So I went down there, became great friends with the family, John Webber's family. John's no longer with us, sadly, but his son Anthony runs the stables still. And he'd had some good winners. He'd had some big winner. And he said to me, you ever thought about having a horse? I said, I can't afford a horse. He said, well, you can. He said, because if you have a horse that earns enough with a few places here and there, can pay for the stabling, and you can have a lot of fun, and you can go to the races for nothing. And I said, well, I'm not a betting man. He said, don't have to be, just have a bit of fun. So he said, look, there's a horse coming up for sale. It's a young gelding, year-old. He said, yet to be named. He said, it's down in Wiltshire, which is a county down in the west of England. He said, at the Queen Mother's stables. He said, it's her horse, and it's come up for sale, and you can buy it for £8,000, which was, I suppose, in today's money, would have been about 150 grand or something ridiculous. And I went, oh. And he said, you'll have a lot of fun because you can take a lot of people to the races. You can have a bit of fun. It's a jumper. It's a nice horse. And I said, okay. And he said, we'll all go down there together and have a look if you like. I went, yeah, why not? A day out in Wiltshire. So we drive down to Wiltshire to this stables, and we're down there and meet the trainer guy who's got all the horses. So we see the young gelding, and I didn't know what to look at, but we had a vet look, and he said, it's a great horse, lovely horse. And so they said, oh, and he said, Queen Mum, she's here. She's down for a few days because she loved her racing, all the royal family do. And he said she's very interested to meet the man who's bought this horse, because it had no name at the moment. I went, oh, right. So everybody had to line up. There's the stable boys, there's my trainer, John Webber, and there's me. And we're standing in a line, and out comes the Queen Mum coming along the line, and she's meeting everybody and doing all this as she does. And it just shows what a sense of humour. She got up to me and he said, and this is the gentleman who's bought the gelding. Now, remember, I had hair down my back then, total rock and roll in every respect. And she didn't bat an eyelid, she just smiled and looked. And he said, you obviously haven't met Mr. Wakeman, Rick, before. And she said, yeah. And I said, well, we have actually, ma'am, we have met. And she went, really? Tell me. And I said, Thomas Goff. And she went, yes. And I said, I was a young student at the Royal College of Music, and I was invited round by Thomas Goff to play on one of his harpsichords. She said, oh, yes. And I said, and I went into the parlour for morning tea. Now, everybody along the lines either side is looking, they're intrigued with this. And I said, and you were there, Mum, with your sporting life, and you actually tipped me a horse for the day, which be honest with you, I never managed to bet on because I didn't have any money whatsoever. And I said, then I went back in and played the harpsichord. And one of her trainer went, how fascinating. And she looked, she went, I don't remember that at all. And I walked up, and I felt about that high. And she got about 2 more paces up, and she came back, and she said, of course I do. He was wonderful, Thomas, and I do remember you very well. She says, so you've obviously done well for yourself since then. And we had a nice little chat. But she was great with the sense of humour. No, I don't remember that at all. So that was and I introduced Thomas Goff to rock and roll. When we did Six Wives of Henry VIII album, and also the Fragile album, I asked Thomas if I could use one of his harpsichords in the studio, which had never been used except for classical things. And he said, yes, sounds like fun. And he brought a harpsichord along to the studio. And there's the guys, like in the studio, start miking it up a bit like a piano. And he said, can I interject here? And they went, yeah. He said, that's not how you mic up a harpsichord. There's only one way you mic, and you'll need about 12 microphones. And they went, right. And he mic'd this microphone underneath, round the side. It was fascinating to watch. And credit to the people at Advision Studios, they made notes.
Wow.
I mean, there was no photographs back then,
Sure.
so, but they made notes and diagrams of everything. And that became the standard for a studio on how to mic up a harpsichord.
Wow.
Thanks to Thomas. Thomas passed away, and I only found out he passed away when a Christmas card I'd sent him got returned. And then there was a note in there, please call this number, which was his lawyer. And he said, just wanted to let that, I think he became a knight in the end, Sir Thomas. He said, passed away a few months ago, but we have you on file, so we wanted to just let you know. And I said, well, I wish I'd known, because I would have attended his send-off and things like that. So that was it. And ever since then, I have searched for a double manual Thomas Goff harpsichord, a double manual, and I've never been able to find one. And if I had when I had the money, I would have bought one. I would love to have one, but I would imagine they'll be quite silly money now if you can find one. But they're absolutely beautiful. So Thomas, I introduced him to rock and roll, which he thought was fascinating. He thought prog rock was amazing. I played him Siberian Kurywchak, which had the harpsichord solo. Oh, that kind of thing. And it was all on harpsichord. And he thought that was fascinating.
I want to ask you about how did they mic pianos? How did they mic organs back then? What was the standard way to mic a piano?
Every engineer had his own little way of doing things. The famous Trident piano,
Yep.
which was famous for so much stuff, that which a lot of people always thought was a Steinway, but it was a Bechstein. It was a Bechstein piano, and it was a rented piano. It wasn't even owned by the studio.
Okay.
It's over here in America somewhere now. But they used to mic it up. They'd put a half lid. There's another little thing here. If you push it through, so you can actually put it at that height rather than the high height. They did that, and then they covered it with
like packing blankets or something.
No, a cover, proper piano cover that was covered over it, and then mic'd it inside. They controlled the sound in there. It was. I've never known any other piano be able to do it, and Trident worked well for it. And that was Robin Cable and Ken Scott who came up with that, and it was just legendary.
Is that so that you wouldn't get bleed in the piano from the other instruments?
There was nothing. It was, you got total separation, and they had very low input levels up there because otherwise they get lots of feedback and things. It was really cleverly done, and which is why a lot of people in the end thought it was a Steinway, because most studios had Steinways, because you couldn't see the make because of the lid and everything. As I say, it was a Bechstein, which I love Bechsteins. They had a unique way of it's miking, like the lot hasn't changed. There was people who would mic by putting little condenser mics in the holes in the piano. But basically, most people knew their piano in the studio and have their own way of miking it. Harpsichord, completely different, because you mic underneath, to the side, up in the angle. When I record piano now, I record piano, a Steinway Model D in a big granary, which is about twice the size of this studio. Huge high ceiling. It's very old. It's probably 500-600 years old, this place. And we put the piano on a carpet in the middle, and my engineer, Eric, who comes home, he probably uses, no exaggeration, 30 microphones.
Okay.
He'll close mic inside and he'll mic under, and he'll mic working outwards as well and up high, so that he'll have he'll have 30 feeds in to get exactly the ambience and the sound. But also means as well, within a piece, he can change what he wants to get. And he's brilliant, Eric. He is so good. So he spends half a day micing up, even though he knows how to do it at the granary. And and I think it's the finest sounding recorded piano ever.
What would be the typical way to mic a Leslie cabinet?
A Leslie cabinet, you mic at the top because it's got the big rotary thing.
Yep.
And then it's got the horns at the top,
Yep.
which go round. There are slats at the top, which is where the horn sound comes out. I mean, a lot gets lost inside. I personally would have a mic on each of the slats going round on the four corner, and I'd have mics round the bottom, and I'd have mics just away from it all. You need to close mic it, really.
Yeah. Would you blend those mics later to save to save tracks? So you just blend them at the board and then go to...
Well, you used to back then. You had to because you were so limited with
And how many tracks typically, if we're talking about the early 70s, how many tracks would the organ use? 2 or 1?
At the end of the day, you'd probably be given 1 because you only had 16 tracks to work with. In fact, when I started 4-track, there was a lot of bouncing that went on. I mean, the King Bouncer was George, the Beatles' producer, and because George was brilliant, he would. Sgt. Pepper's was done on a 4-track.
Yeah.
And he'd bounce from. I mean, the amount of bouncing that went through. But what you have to do where he was really clever, because obviously things get mellower and more
Get darker and darker, right?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. So what he would do, as he used to do the bouncing, he would adjust that by adding more. He knew his sounds.
Yeah.
George Martin was brilliant at that. But not many people had that skill. Very few people had that skill. The other problem you had in the studio back then, I remember with Yes and with my own stuff. I mean, even back then we could have done with 70 or 80 tracks, and you didn't have it. So you'd listen to a piece and go, well, I need a cowbell there.
Yeah.
So you go, well, there's no space. So you go along and say, oh, hold on a minute. On the acoustic guitar thing, there's a little gap there. We'll put the cowbell in that little gap. So stuff went in all over the place, which is sometimes why mixes ended up a bit strange, but good. Because my argument's always been there's no such thing right or wrong with a mix. You can push your faders up 1,000.
Now, would you guys
ways.
mix like for your Yes records? Would you mix sections of the song and then put them together, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That's how we recorded as well. Did it in sections, and then and that's the best way we could get a performance. So we'd start playing, and then when it went wrong, you stop. Go back a bit, carry on from there, because then that's the closest you can get to a performance. But mixing was a joke. Yes mixes were never like Yes mixes because it was just like 6 pairs of hands on the faders, and it was a joke. So it ended up, it was just a nightmare. They're so compacted, so condensed. Yes mixes. Which I never really liked. I always thought that Yes stuff could have been mixed a lot better, and I wish that Yes had worked the way that David Bowie worked, which is called you've got an engineer and a producer there, let them do it. Your job is to play.
Would the musicians have to have their say on things or something?
Oh, they do all have faders on their own stuff.
Sure.
So they slowly be going up higher and higher and higher till it reached the top. Then they'd all get pulled back again. Because the truth of the matter is, nobody really was listening to the overall thing. Everyone was listening to their own bits, and can I make them louder? But you see how David Bowie worked was different. You'd finished, you'd finish a track. I mean, I'll give you a little example. You'd finish like Life on Mars with David. So you'd finish. And he'd wait for the call from Ken Scott. That's it, come on up. So by the time I got up there, David would be ready to go. He'd go, great, really love that, that's absolutely brilliant. And he'd be off. He never stayed for any mixes, never stayed. He said, when I hear a mix, that's the closest I'm ever going to get to hear it for the first time.
Wow.
He said, if I'm at mixes, I'm be obsessed with one little bit or something. Yeah, I don't go to mixes. And it's even easier now because with Eric, my engineer and producer, we finish something, I leave him all to it. He goes back to his own studio to do the mixes. And then when I hear it for the first, it's like hearing it for the first time. And if there is any little thing that sticks out, I go, hey, that keyboard bit at the end seems to be a bit loud for me. What do you think? He said, yeah, I think it's too. It doesn't matter, I can redo that because everything's now automation. Right. So he just tells it, change that little bit and do it again. I don't go to mixes and I won't go to mixes. And I think it was one of Yes's failings that over keen, obsessed with, I've got to be there to the end. You don't. You've done your job. Let somebody do their job.
If you take a song like Roundabout, right in the opening, there's that backwards piano that swells in. Let me actually play it so people know what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
So that backwards piano that happens there, when did that happen? Is that your idea there?
It was my idea.
Okay.
Because initially we had just a low note. It was just a... And then Steve would come in. Whatever it is. And we just thought that was a bit boring.
Okay.
So I think we tried it with a mellotron or something else. And then, backwards piano. So the way you did the backwards piano, you turned the tape round. You made a chinograph mark, and then you played the note on the chinograph mark, and then turned the tape back over. And then you got that. And then we added another one. There was one in between the introduction and that as well. I mean, Roundabout was one of the first things that I ever did with Yes. We rehearsed it in a rehearsal room in Mayfair in London, which was above a brothel. Because me being very wet behind the ears back then, just 20 years old or whatever, I couldn't quite understand why in the middle of summer there were all these women in fur coats walking in and out the doors downstairs. But the crew obviously knew because they went missing a lot. But we did Roundabout, and that's where I discovered a new way of writing, which I loved. Normally, everything I'd done before with sessions, working with Straubs, working with other bands that I'd worked with, it was a song. You worked with a song and you played around with the arrangement and did things, like when I did things with Junior's Eyes and bands like that. Steve had an idea. I remember it all started, he had the... Went, oh, that's fun. We can do fun with that, and I thought, well, that's not a song yet, so we started playing it, just running it through, and Chris said, this needs a sort of a Family Stone kind of thing, which is why he did the. He did, and John said, son, what do you fancy doing? I said, well, I can do it. So we did that, and then I think the intro thing came. Steve said, I've got this other little thing. We had this in the major key. So we thought, play it in the minor key. So I think it was Bill said, what happens if you play it in the minor key? I said, we go. Whatever it is. And so we started just playing around with that. And I'm thinking, and then so we can get into after that. And then we go to, and did all those, but it started like a jigsaw puzzle. And I thought, this is interesting. And John, meanwhile, is sitting there, listening to everything. He'd say, maybe if you come in there, you come in, maybe try that. And then he's making little notes and obviously thinking about lyrical content and various things. And then Bill said, need an organ solo. This is my first, so how do we get into it? And so I think it was Chris who had the idea for this. In and around the lake, which became...
Yeah.
We did it then... when we came to do this in the studio to record it, we played it live in the studio. I mean, corrected things and that afterwards. But we came to the organ solo, and I've got Bill Bruford to thank for that. Bill, such a great friend, and it came to the organ solo. I did the organ solo, and Steve did his bits in the middle. All that kind of thing, and we did it, and it did rock. We're in Advision Studios. You know when something, that's shit, that's it. And it collapsed shortly after. It sort of fell apart, so we're going to go back to that bit. And we went in, and I said, well, maybe I'll redo the organ solo, have a little listen. And Bill said, you won't. He said, because that's a solo. That's how you felt. That's a solo. He said, that was everything that it should be. He said, all you'll do is start to maybe tidy a bit up here and change that there. He said, no. He said, I'm going to stick my foot down. Because it was quite a democratic man. He said, that stays.
Wow.
And I went, right, okay. And Chris said, absolutely, that doesn't move, that stays, that solo. And it did. And that's how we worked in the studio. Now, I always classed it was a giant jigsaw puzzle. Everybody brought different parts along, and you put the parts together, and you made it work. And we always got a performance, because when we were recording or rehearsing, if it collapsed, you went back and then carried on from there, So there's a lot of editing to do, but you knew you were guaranteed a performance.
And who would somebody keep notes of all this stuff? Like, oh, we have this section, we have to do this section, and...
Well, when he was on the same planet as us, Eddie Offord did, but occasionally when Eddie wandered off to another planet, it got to a bit of a mess. But, and it was a tape ops nightmare, because in those days you had engineer had it was a tape ops nightmare, because you had to keep notes of it, because often or not we were impatient if we did something and it went, well, right, okay, we're going right now, and we were straight in. So there wasn't time to go, oh, well, we're going to make notes and things on that. But it was a wonderful way of working, and I still work like that now. When I redid Journey and King Arthur, I had the band live in the studio, and we did the same thing. Play until it goes, even though you can correct with digital record, I still wanted the guys to do performances. Yeah. And that's important to me. And it was I'd never worked that way before, and I loved it. And I still think one of the tragedies is that in later years, well, it's one of the things really that digital recording and remote recording has stopped, because you don't get the chance to go in the studio altogether anymore.
I want to talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
Is there a way that we can just dial up the organ in 2 seconds? And I think it's on right there.
Yeah.
Rick, how do you set the drawbars? How are you? Tell me about this exactly. Hold on, Pavel. Can you see him do it?
Yeah, not if you stand in front of.
Okay, I won't stand there. Okay. Okay, so.
Well, first of all, there's probably a volume control on the Leslie, which I would have flat out, so you got that little bit of distortion. Yeah. Which you don't get.
Should we turn it up a little bit? Can you guys turn it up so we can get some distortion?
So I would have a bit of a mixture of the different harmonics that come out. I would always have it'd be roughly around about that. And over here, I would have, gosh, it's years since I played London. And that would all be on.
And you'd split it between the two keyboards.
Well, yeah, I'd have a... I mean, it wouldn't... I wouldn't have much going on here. More than anything else, it'd be to balance out the hands so you had something to work with.
Yeah, something to kind of play off of, right?
So you'd have a... And I'd probably almost have a kitchen sink out for the solo. So when it's in and around the lake. So you find you do that. And,
Rick, you improvised that, though, on the spot, right?
yeah. It wasn't your bog standard thing.
Right.
Yes, always it's something a little bit different instead of... It's sticking the B flat in the end, you go... It gave you more to play with up, you know.
Right.
You know, it gave you that bit more to play with. So it was really lovely for me. I can remember doing the solo to this day. It was like being let out the cage. It was, and that's the thing that people didn't understand about. Yes, sometimes people thought it was all very fixed and very regimented and everything it did. It wasn't.
You guys were jamming.
Yeah, I mean, yes, did jam.
Yeah.
It might have not been the jam that you would get normally, but it was our own form of jamming, and it worked. It worked for. I didn't do a lot of hammer with the, although I was staying close to the edge with the solo. Again, that was a one take. That was a one take, because I remember, because it sort of became a bit of a part, because I remember that particular solo in Close to the Edge suffered from what I call the John Entwistle My Generation syndrome.
Okay, which is what?
John was one of my dearest friends, a great friend, and the bass solo in My Generation is one of the classic bass things of all time. And John said it was the bane of his life. He said, because it was a solo.
Right, yeah.
We're in the studio. He said, I did it, and that was it. It became a huge hit. He said, then we go out and we're playing, and it comes to my back, so I do a solo. And people would come and go, played that wrong.
Right.
He said, no, I didn't, it's a solo. No, you played it wrong. It's not that wrong, you didn't play it right. And he said, this happened so many times. People said, even reviewers said, oh, such a shame that John played the bass bit wrong in the, well, he said, so I sat, he said, one day I went, fuck it. He said, and I sat in the hotel with my bass and a little pig nose amp. He said, and I learnt it, what I'd played. He said, that was the only way. And that was when he said, it's interesting. He said, that sometimes when a solo actually becomes a part.
Right.
It becomes a part of the music. It's no longer a solo. And I had that a little bit with the Close to the Edge thing, because it was a solo, but I had to learn it. But it was all right. You know, these things happen. But which is why the truth of the matter is, there is no such thing as a solo on record.
Right.
It doesn't exist. It's a feeling of that time.
That's right.
And it is
it becomes fixed in time.
Yeah, so I have a way of cheating around that. Well, not cheating, but a way of dealing with it all, which is, for example, if you take Awaken, the Yes track Awaken, which has a very long church organ solo.
And it's a real church organ,
Oh, yeah.
right?
So church organ recorded in Vevey in Switzerland.
Yeah, I wondered about that.
Which we recorded down the telephone lines to the studio, which was, because Switzerland, of course, preparing for a nuclear war, had great hi-fi telephones buried 60 foot under the ground. You could rent them. So we rented them.
Oh my gosh.
And we recorded this to the studio, which was 9 miles away.
Okay.
In Montreux. Absolutely fantastic to do. And that was great fun to do. But and that became a sort of a solo which people sort of knew. And the way I decided on stage was that they actually didn't know every note, because I didn't know every bloody note, but there were certain bits that people would remember. I mean, this is not, I haven't got a church organ, so long as you got the opening bit right, then. John with his little harp. But there were certain bits that you had to get to.
Yeah.
It's just so like... So long as you hit those stepping stones, and I had, when we were doing it with ARW and with the last times I was with Yes, I had, I think there was about 12 stepping stones to get to. And I told, Chris and Alan, and see where those stepping stones were, so they would listen out for them. And when they got them, they know, okay, he may go way off the rails here and do things, but he will end up back at, and that's how we always. So it was
amazing.
It was the same every night, but different, which is what I say about the Yes Sonata thing I play, and that's something that I've always worked on. I do it with my own stuff as well. There's stepping stones, and we do it with the Journey and with King Arthur and with the Six Wives, and all the lads know where the stepping stones are. So when you get and which it makes it fresh every time. I mean, people sometimes think, oh, you play the same notes every night. You don't. That's a big misnomer. But we make you think we do.
Right.
And that's the difference. But I haven't played one of these. In fact, my Hammond that I played roundabout on is sitting in a private museum collection in Philadelphia. So that's where that is. And I have another C3, which was an American one. I'd say there was an A, B, and C. The A3 was like a church kind of. So this was what they used to call the washstand, the B3, and I had a C3, which was more flat sides and various things. But
are the electronics between the B3 and C3 pretty
same.
similar? Exactly the same, right?
Absolutely the same,
okay.
Identical. And I've still got my. It's not been out of its case for 40 years.
Okay.
I don't even know if I got it up and running, whether it will still be working. Because now, with the samples and various things, it's so much easier with.
Yeah.
And the problem with these on the road, they're brilliant, but on the back of each one of these drawbars is the electric wire, and they break.
Yeah.
So you'd arrive at a show, pulled out you pulled out I don't know, a phone, so you should hear this, and you go, and all you're hearing is the percussion instead of that.
Right.
So you go, so they'd have to take the back off and soldering all the wires in. So nowadays, when you want to make life. You want to get as authentic sounds as you can, but you want to make life as easy as possible, because the crews have to work so hard, the technicians. So, these, if you're in a fixed place for a little while, I mean, my son, Adam, who plays with Ozzy Osbourne things, and he carts his C3 around a lot, but not if it's got to do lots of trips.
Right.
Because the crew turn around to him and say, tough.
When you guys were touring, you had a huge road case for your C3, right?
Yeah, well, we used to split them. You would cut them in half.
Uh-huh.
So it didn't have the legs, and then they'd rest. Yeah, so you split them, and they were in road cases. But they don't like being slung around. I mean, there's valves in the back. There's all none of this stuff was built for travel.
So would you have a tech that would come out and or would you tech this stuff? Would you know how to? No way, right?
Listen, I can only just send a text. Yeah, I'd have you'd have a tech that used to do his best to put things right. But most of the instruments I had back in the 70s, I mean, the Mellotron, the tapes used to fly out. They were a nightmare. I remember having a celebratory day. It was in my drinking days when I opened a bottle of champagne as the Mellotrons burnt in the garden. So I set fire to them. Because the great sound, but awful. But you see, nowadays, I've got a thing called the Memetron, which is German. You cannot tell the difference. It's absolutely brilliant. But it's easy. Plug it in, it works.
Yeah.
So that was a nightmare. The Hammond was a nightmare. Minimogs used to go wildly out of tune because they didn't like being slung around.
Yep.
And all those things have now been rectified.
That's right.
So I can go out with a rig now. I have a big rig when I go out with the band, which is great fun. But the one thing that is wonderful, I can stand in front of it and know that barring an absolute disaster somewhere, it's all going to do exactly what it's meant to do. And that frees you up to musically be free to go, I know if I hit that note, it's going to do what I want it to do. I'm going to sound. And that's the big difference between then and now. I did one show with Yes in Chicago where I lost everything because also some techs had plugged the English stuff into American. So I ended up with the grand piano and a tambourine. I've still got the review somewhere that said that Wakeman, who was normally quite flamboyant, was quite subdued. I had no bloody instruments. I had the piano and the tambourine. But it was pioneering days. See, that was great.
Yeah.
Nobody knew how to amplify keyboards. They were a joke. You stick into a Marshall stack or something, but it never was right because it didn't have the depth that the keyboards had. And there's two people. Every keyboard player who has great keyboard monitoring that today has two people to thank, which is the great Roy Clare from the Roy Clare amplification and PA systems and that, and Michael Tate from Tate Towers, who came to me at one show and they said, "This is ridiculous. Basically all we can hear from you is distortion. We can't hear anything." I said, well, nobody makes anything. Nobody even made keyboard stands. I used to buy chest of drawers, take the drawers out, cut the sides off and put stuff on there. Nobody did anything. And they said, it was Roy Clare said, you need a mini PA for your stuff alone. And he got hold of a Martin little mini PA for me, and suddenly I could be heard. And Michael Tate made a mixer. He said, you need a mixer. You can't have all these feeds and things going in. And suddenly they changed the face of keyboard monitoring, those two guys. It's another thing I get a bee in my bonnet about sometimes. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Why aren't Roy Clare and Michael Tate in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? There would not be rock and roll as we know it today in any way, manner, fashion or form without those two guys. And yet people go in there that, I go, who? But there you go. I've had a moan.
I want to do one more thing at the piano here.
Yeah.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
So Morning is Broken.
Yeah. When
you came in to work on that track, you played the piano on it.
Yeah.
It didn't have that intro. That's your intro there. The whole piano arrangement. What was there? Was there just a couple chords or something? Or?
Yeah, when I arrived there was just me and Steve Cat Stevens, as he was then, and his acoustic guitar. And in fact, he sat on a stool, very much like you're sitting there now. And he said, I had an idea for an intro, and it was... and I went, yeah, all right. He said, can you do anything? And I said, yeah. And I'd been playing, because I'd written Catherine Howard, funny enough, that week. He said, I like that kind of thing. So I said, well, taking your I said, let's see what I can pull together. And it's interesting, this, because it's quite delusional, this piece. So I came up eventually with... Came up with that, which for the very opening, he said, oh, that's really good. And his producer, Paul Samuel Smith, said, that worked really well. He said, but for the beginning, what would be really good is if we can have a shorter version because of the length of the record. So can you do a shorter version of that? I said, well, you can take where we've taken the key change from. So that shortens it, so he can come in with morning has. So we did that and played around with it, and it was just me and Steve did it. But the interesting thing was, I played all through the morning has broken. And it was Paul Samuel Smith, when we went and listened to it, he said, can we try something? I said, what's that? He said, I don't want you to play in the verses, except for a few little one of your little runs. He said, don't play the chords, so it's just a acoustic guitar, and then you're coming in with a... He said, because I think it'll make more of an impact when you come in. So the interesting thing is, most people think I played piano all the way through Morning Has Broken, but I only played on the... You go, morning has broken, like the first morning. And I do those little fiddly bits in between. That's good production. That's a good producer who lets it go, I can make the intros or the intros of the piano more positive because you're not playing directly before it. So it was great. It was great fun to do. I remember Stephen smoking heaven knows how many cigarettes before he did the vocals, because that's how he goes, oh, that's how he got his voice.
Yeah.
And for a man who, I think he's only got one lung through because he had tuberculosis, you think, talk about dying for your art.
Right.
But he was great fun to work for. I loved working with him on that track. It's the only track I ever did with him, because shortly afterwards, he became Islamic and became Yusuf Islam, which I was very pleased about, that he'd found his faith, because I think if you can find a faith, whatever it is great. If it works for you, which you did for him, which was great. My only thing, which I did say to him, because he stopped playing for a long time.
Right.
And I said, why? I said, the only thing I'd say to you, Yusuf, is that if your God, you believe that your God gave you a talent, surely he'd want you to use it, not hide it away. So I was very pleased when he sort of came back and started singing and playing again. We left it too long, but lovely man. I used to get a lot of work with people like him at the time because of my association with Straubs. I was known as the piano player that worked with the folkies, because David Bowie was a folkie originally. He was David Jones. So I used to do things with great people like Colin Scott. There was an unusual man over here called Tucker Zimmerman. I did a lot of stuff with who Tony Visconti really loved. Al Stewart. That was great fun. I did one track with Al Stewart on the Orange album. Now, the Orange album, this is where I got my high horse about things, is one of what I call forgotten albums, because we recorded the Orange album. There was a track on there called News from Spain, which I just loved. It's full of piano. I loved it. But almost immediately afterwards, before it was even mixed and done, Al came over to live in America, recorded Year of the Cat, huge.
Yep.
So the Orange album just got completely forgotten. And it's a really forgotten album. So I often say, you want to get a forgotten album, want to treat yourself? Buy the Orange album. So I did a lot of work with the singer-songwriters, a big time of singer-songwriters. And I was very lucky. I used to get called up for loads of them, which was great fun.
Now, through Tony, you played on those Bowie records. You played on the did you play on Changes? Did you play on that track? Was this pre-Yes?
No. Well, Hunky Dory was pre-Yes. Just before Yes. And
Madman Across the Water, you played on that record, right?
Yeah, that was Gus Dudgeon.
Yeah.
And that was I'm trying to think, was that pre-Yes, or there was a bit of a crossover at the time when I first joined Yes. I mean, Elton, great friend. I mean, there's one of the things that people forget about Elton John is because he's such an amazing songwriter and singer. What a good player! He's a great player. He's a really good player, but it sort of gets lost a bit because of his singing and the songwriting. But we were really good friends because we're both soccer freaks, and at that time he was chairman of a club near London called Watford, and I was a director of a club called Brentford. And they used to meet in games, and we used to meet there. It was quite a fun. So we were good mates, and I had a lot of time for Elton. And he said to me one, he said, "I'm going into Trident Studios to do an album, Madman Across the Water." I said, "Yeah, it's really good." He said, "There's some organ stuff on there." You know, he said, "I hate playing the organ." He just didn't like playing the organ.
Sure.
He wasn't comfortable. He said, "Don't fancy doing it, do you?" I went, "Yeah, I'll do it for you." So I went in and did it, and it was lovely. It was great. I mean, I don't have any qualms about what I do, who I play with. I'll always give my best to wherever I go and whatever I do. So I did. It's not really documented, but I did a concert with him at the Royal Festival Hall. He had the orchestra and the band. This was, and I did the organ on that. Just as part of the band, you know, I'm happy if it's something that's fun. It's like when the orchestral Tommy was done, which was brilliant. They did shows at Finsbury Park at the Rainbow Theatre, and I was asked. So the conductor Dave Measham said, "I couldn't convince you to do, you know, the clavinet stuff and things." I said, "Yeah, I'd love to do it. It was not much money. I don't care. I'd love to do it." You know, so you know, if it's something that is fun and another experience that you don't know, you know, I'll happily go along and do it. You know, I've done some weird things. The number of times people said to me, "Didn't think you'd do that." I go, "Why not?" You know, I suppose it goes right back to the Jimmy Thomas days, which you talked about. You know, count me in.
One last thing I want to ask you about is the kind of where the music industry is right now.
Yeah. Oh, we've got 3 hours.
Give me the Rick Wakeman kind of synopsis of where we are in 2024.
The first thing, it all stems from initially the record industry tended to be not totally run, but mostly run by people who loved music, cared about music, and cared about the musicians and the people that they had. Not in every case, but in general, that was the situation. Slowly but surely, accountants and lawyers took over who, to be honest, don't know a crotchet from a hatchet. They haven't got a clue. So it's all business and bottom line. So they don't look at things closely enough. Then the industry started making, the biggest mistake they made was the word replacement. Vinyl, they suddenly decided, and I'm missing a few things out, of course, along the line. Vinyl, they said, right, vinyl said, we want CDs now. You don't want vinyl anymore. Everybody needs CDs. They didn't say, here's another choice of getting your music. You don't want that. This is a replacement. And then they tried the mini disc to replace the...
Oh, yeah. Forgot about that.
That was another disaster. And then it was downloading and all of the things and streaming. So you don't need any of that. Wrong. What they should have done is to say, listen, here's another way of having your music. You've got a multiple choice of having your music. You know, it's not a replacement at all. And it has slowly got a bit better with a lot of the new generation. They've discovered vinyl.
That's right.
And vinyl is overtaking CDs. And now they're saying, oh, we need to press up CDs again now because they stopped doing it, because people want... It's all very well having a streaming and downloading and Spotify, or Shitify as I call it, because they don't... You know, the artists get paid pittance, you don't get paid any money. Yeah. And music is tactile. You can feel it here and you can hold it there. Yeah. So if you've got an album with a great artwork and things, you can look at it, you can read all the things about who's on it, what was done, the history of the whole, and play, and then tactile, it's tactile. Music, and they've forgotten that. It's not hidden out there in the ether. It's something to hold. And what that's done, that's taken away the great record shops, it's the great stores. And I know even up until 20, 30 years ago. You go into a record store, thousands of records and CDs, whatever, and you'd be going through trying to find, and somebody next to you go, oh, have you seen the new, you like that? Seen the new Jethro Tull album? No, that's really, and people would talk, and then you go back, you talk to your friends about what you'd found, this great music. It was passed on by person to person. They've taken that away. So there's no interaction now between people buying records and people say, oh, it's all online. Oh, God, do you really want to spend millions? And what do you do when you go online? You get what you were looking for. You go into a record store, I guarantee you'll come out with maybe what you're looking for, but something else as well, and some other things as well. And they've taken that away. What would my argument be? What would I like to see happen? I'd like to see, let's use the word tower just for a thing. A tower records but a tower records with a difference. So yes, you've got vinyl, you've got new CDs, you've also got old CDs and old vinyl, so you can do an exchange. You've got all of that kind of thing that can go on there. And if you want to do a download, then a bit like you have at a big store, you've got your computer sections where you can choose what you want, order your album that you want to do, which is in the same way that years and years ago, everybody used to take the tracks they liked and put them onto a cassette recorder to play in your car. Yeah. It's the same thing, only you do it like that. Maybe even choose a Roger Dean cover to things to have. So you could do all of that. And also, please, God, bring back listening booths. Well, can I just listen to that track, listen to that album, and then have a whole coffee shop area where people sit down with people they don't know and say, oh, what have you just bought?
Love that.
Have you heard that? Yeah, have you? Interaction. It's what music is all about. And I don't think it will be that difficult to do that. You just need a couple of record companies or a couple of people to go, I can see that. I can see that happening. I can see that working. And that is, I think, would help to bring back the different ways you can buy music and have music. Because at the moment, the record industry just thinks streaming and all that. And I'm sorry, that's not something to have. I want to take something. So yeah, it's fine if you're in the car, you're listening on the plane. But I want to take, if I'm at home, I want to go, oh, that's really good. Let's play that. It's tactile. You feel it here, you feel it there. And I think the industry at this present moment in time isn't a music industry. But it's not too late to bring it back. If there was and it wouldn't take a lot. If the major record companies got together, Sony, Universal, Arista, they all got together and said, I tell you what, we'll invest, it wouldn't cost a fortune. We'll invest a couple of million in this each.
So maybe some of the people watching this are going to take this idea or reach out and make this happen, because that sounds like a great idea.
I'd love to be in charge of it, because you're just in the major cities. You open up, and let's face it, at the moment, because of the economies in both our countries, there are shops, big shops, department stores, lying empty. They're in a desperate state. So you put them in there and make it a welcoming place that all age groups can go into and buy music. And I just think it's not rocket science. It really isn't rocket science. So I have little respect for what the record industry has become, but I don't think it's beyond redemption. I really don't. If it happens in my lifetime, who knows? I would be the happiest man to know that future generations, yeah, your music's out there.
Cool. Rick, it's such a pleasure to get to sit with you today.
That's very kind. Thanks, Rick.
And it was an honor to hear you play. Wow, it's fantastic.
Very kind. Thank you so very much. No, thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Cheers, mate.
Once again, I'd like to thank Rick for being my guest today. Remember to hit the subscribe button, leave a comment. Thanks for watching.